Welcome, everybody, to the Rowan College of Burlington County Global Studies Lecture Series. This is a continuation of a series of conversations in global health, environment, and security and key international issues affecting those. This event and this series is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education's Undergraduate International Studies and Foreign Language Grant Program, a multi-year grant that the Rowan College has with our partner institution, Rowan University, to build global and international studies designations at both institutions and courses in high demand languages such as Arabic and Chinese, along with student activities reflecting these initiatives. This is also hosted by Rowan College, a mid-sized 2- and 3-year college in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, serving the geographically largest county in the state with anywhere from 7,000 to 9,000 students each semester. Rowan College has one of the most ethnically diverse student bodies in the state and region, with one of the lowest tuition costs as well. I'm your host for this event in this series. I'm Brandon Chapman, instructor and department chair of anthropology and sociology at the college. And the goal of the lecture series is to continue to bring to Rowan College campus and here our virtual WebEx campus, top-level scholars, academics, researchers, and industry professionals at all levels of career, early, mid, and late career, that are experienced, knowledgeable experts in global health, environment, and security issues, and to develop this knowledge and skill in our students, of course, at both Rowan University and Rowan College, and to have a dynamic conversation about key global issues within these areas, and to give our students such avenues to advance their training in these areas as well. Look for more of these events in the future. As usual, we have a lineup coming into this academic year. We have this event in summer, and our next one will be on Wednesday, September 13th with Leah Bustan, who's an economist at Princeton University. She will be talking about her recent book, Streets of Gold, on the history and current trends of immigration and immigrants to the United States and immigrant contributions historically and currently to the country. This evening, I should say, excuse me, this afternoon, we have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Scott Rozelle. Dr. Rozelle is the Helen F. Farnsworth Senior Fellow and co-director of the Rural Education Action Program in the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies, and co-director of the Stanford Center on China's Economy and Institutions, both at Stanford University. Dr. Rozelle has a decades-long career in researching and publishing on numerous issues within China, and I believe he's been going there for fieldwork for over 40 years now, since the early 80s. And he's researched and published widely on the country, including about its agricultural policies, economic development and institutions, rural health, education, nutrition, and poverty and inequality across the country. He holds numerous academic and has held numerous academic and governmental advisory appointments, including having chaired the International Advisory Board of the Center for Chinese Agricultural Policy. He's co-directed the University of California's Agricultural Issues Center, and he's been a member of Stanford's Walter H. Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center and the Center on Food Security and the Environment. Dr. Rozelle has been published in top academic journals, including Science, Nature, American Economic Review, and the Journal of Economic Literature, and has received numerous honors and awards, including the Friendship Award back in 2008, which is the highest award given to a non-Chinese individual by the Premier, and the National Science and Technology Collaboration Award in 2009 for scientific achievement in collaborative research. A note on format and agenda for the event, I'll be handing it over to Dr. Rozelle here, who will be giving his talk, and then we will, if there are any audience questions, I'll help moderate those to our guest, and I also have some questions prepared as well to hopefully provide a lively discussion and dive a little deeper into some of the topics here of Chinese rural development, which we'll be talking about today. So with that, and with his talk titled, and based on the title of his recent book, Invisible China, How the Urban-Rural Divide Threatens China's Rise, let's welcome Scott Rozelle to Rowan College.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate the really nice introduction. And I did my master's and PhD not far from you guys at Cornell, and so it's sort of anything outside of New York City in that area is I have a lot of good feelings from those times. So it's good to be there. We need to be in person soon, but doing online is good. Let me get started. I'm gonna share my screen. This is my book that I read, which basically tried to put together a lot of the material that I'd done over the years, and it's really, really well written book. That's because Natalie, one of my longtime students and collaborators, she was the writer. We wrote everything together, but the last version is always Natalie's, and it's really well written. So it's and what you're going to see is this isn't a China bashing book. Okay. I have lots of friends in China, and I've worked with many, many, many people in rural and urban economies. I want them to do well. As we see China's economy sort of teetering, there's challenges there. China's economy doing well is good for China. It's good for the United States. It's good for the world. We don't want a stagnating or falling China, because that won't be good for Asia or the rest of the world. So it's always not the most politically correct thing to say, but for many reasons, I want China to succeed. I want them to do fair, cooperative, all-encompassing, transparent. But my work has always been, how do we, work on just a small part of the economy called the rural economy, and it's this invisible China that I'm talking about. Invisible China is rural China. It's only 840 million people, right? And 1 out of every 9 people in the world is out there. 2 United States plus. And so, this is a big, big part of China that almost no one has heard about. That these are the workers. These are self-employed, the gig economy guys, right? So, the guys who repair bikes on the corner, or the Uber DD drivers, and then they're also the farmers. If you go to the rural areas today, it's the elderly and the children that are left behind, or the families that have squeezed into the cities and live down the alleys and the basements. These are there are 840 million people here. When I first started working on China, yes, more than 40 years ago, just to go from Shanghai to Beijing, you had to take either a slow train or a bus, and you'd stop in the middle, at a farm village to have lunch or stay overnight. And everybody, 85% of the people, had relatives in rural China. So everybody knew what was happening there, but, it wasn't invisible 40 years ago. But today, you fly everywhere. I just got back from 6 weeks in China, and in those 36 days, 37 days, something like that, I took about 17 flights and high-speed rails. And when you fly or go on these high-speed rails, you can't even take a picture of a village. Everything's going so fast. And so people know this part of China, right? The Shanghais, the Beijings, the Shenzhens. But this invisible China is what I really want to talk about. We almost get no glimpse of that. Okay. So, a lot of this book is based on the survey and in-depth field work in 28 provinces, more than 650 counties. I've been to. It's actually, I wrote this 3 or 4 years ago. It's 656 now, and I've been to tens of thousands of villages and tens of thousands of schools. Here's when I started back in, that's my PhD research. And there would be just scores of children that would follow me across. I feel like the Pied Piper back then. Today, there's actually very few children in these villages because demography has just fallen so much. But they're in schools and they come together, and they're boarding when they're 6 years old. I still like to go into the field and see what's happening, talk to people. Every year we train thousands of students to do field research. These million surveys, they're done by these guys, not by me. Okay. We go and talk to doctors and teachers and farmers and listen to them. So that's sort of the background of where this book comes from. So how does this invisible China, these 840 million rural people, how does it actually threaten China's rise? Isn't it shouldn't it be an asset to have all these people? Well, I got a couple graphs, but this is the most important one here. And the x-axis down here is income 70 years ago, and the y-axis is income today. Think of it as income today, okay? And so look at down here in the bottom left-hand corner, low income trap. Basically, this is like the Congo or Ethiopia or Myanmar. So they were poor 60 years ago, they're poor today, okay? Look at the upper right-hand corner up here, the OECD countries. These are the rich. These are, this is Norway and Sweden and Canada and the United States, okay? That we were high income 70 years ago, high income today. I'm interested in two sets of these countries here. One is called the graduates, okay? And these are countries that were middle income 60 years ago, and today they're high income. And what I want you to notice is a couple things is, first, there's not very many of them, okay? I mean, Korea, Israel, Ireland, Greece, Spain, Singapore, countries and territories, Taiwan, China, okay? Is that, 60 years ago, they were middle income, and now they've gone up. Number one, there's not very many of them. There's very few countries that have done this, okay? And it's hard. Number two, the most recent one to do it is the Republic of Korea, South Korea. And it's been over 20 years. No country has graduated in the last 20 years. This country here is Brazil. It almost got up here and it fell back down here. And they're in this second group of countries called the trapped. So the top one, the blues are the graduates, and these in this are the trapped. And so they've 70 years ago, they were middle income. Today, they're middle income. And that's not to say that they live this nice equilibrium. They grow and then fall. They grow and stagnate. And when that happens, there's lots of people in those countries that get hurt. We don't even feel it. When Colombia goes here and here, people in Colombia feel it radically. People in the United States, people in China, they don't feel it at all, right? Because it's such a big world. So I'm interested in saying why these countries are still here and why these countries were able to move up. So that's sort of what I'm interested in. And one of the fundamental differences between these two are at the time of middle income. That's when these guys were at middle income. They're still at middle income today, right? When we think of the entire labor force, this is everyone in the economy between 18 and 65, okay? That the levels of human capital of these guys, when they were middle income, are very, very different than these guys who are middle income now, okay? And look at this. So this is OECD countries. These are the rich. So in OECD countries, 7 or 8 out of 10 people in this labor force have been to high school or above. So, right, that they, when they go to high school, I think going to high school is so important, because in high school you learn math and science and computers and language. Those are the skills that you need in a high income economy. To go. We need a few low income. We need a few laborers in a high income economy. 10% or 20%, but 80% of this labor force needs to be in the high income white collar sector, where you need math and science and computers and language to do so. Look at the middle income grads. When they were middle income, they were already had high level income of education. So that it's incredible. So this is like Ireland. Why was it when Ireland was middle income, they sent everyone to high school? Well, it's a long story, but they sent them there originally to keep them off the street. Then everyone went to high school. This is 20, 30 years ago. And now the entire labor force has been to high school or above, and they've become the Silicon Valley, the high-tech capital of Europe, right? And so, it really had a big change. But look at the trapped, okay? The trapped: Turkey, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa. Instead of 7 or 8 out of 10, it's 3 or 4 out of 10 that have been there, which means that 6 or 7 out of 10 have never been to one day of high school. They don't know math and science. They don't know computers or language. That when these countries try to move up the high income, that these guys, if you don't have those basic skills to learn how to learn, you aren't going to be able to work there. And these countries then stagnate in no small part because of this. That's what I say. So look at the difference, right? The middle income grads are twice as much educated. Okay, so I mean, this is a summary of what I've been saying. When a country moves from middle income to high income, right? This is what China is trying to do right now. Wages rise. The nature of work changes from low wage, low skill to high wage, high skill. And if a large share of this labor force can't participate in, can't go to the white collar wave, you start to get polarization. You get the people down here who can't work and the people up here who are working at these high income jobs. You get the rise of unemployment. Then there's informality. It turns into crime and social unrest. On the productivity, that's the demand side. On the supply side, there's not enough people to work in your new firms. You have an absence of qualified workers. There's a bad investment climate because there's a rise of social unrest. You get stagnation and then more polarization, and you're trapped in middle income. Okay. So what happens when a large share of the labor force slides into this informal economy? Look at it. Here are these middle income countries: Argentina, Brazil, Costa Rica, Honduras, India, Mexico. And what this is the share of the labor force in the informal sector. So this is the gig economy. So these are the Uber drivers and the DoorDash drivers that are out there. But it's also, the guys who, that wash your windows when you come up the thing. It's the guys who flip tortillas on the side of the road. It's people when you're in informal sector, you don't have a unit. You don't belong to a unit. You aren't covered by the labor laws. You don't have the social benefits of working in a company or a unit that of there. And it's these guys. These are the informal workers. This is pictures from Mexico. And what happens is they earn so little, they have so little social benefits, is, they squirrel themselves away in the housing markets. This is a colleague of mine there's this university kind of near you guys in Boston. It starts with an H. Santiago used to be at Harvard. He actually is the lead economist at the Inter-American Development Bank. And he talks about Mexico. And he says, look at it's if you look at Mexico, we thought should have made it. It had solid macroeconomic performance, export success, and lots of human capital. Wait a minute. That sounds like China, right? I mean, macroeconomic performance, they have lots of physical capital. Gosh, you saw the high-speed rails and the freeways and certainly export success. They're the biggest exporter in the world. But they stopped. They stagnated. Mexico did. Why? Because productivity stagnated. Why? Because the informal sector was too large. It outcompeted the formal sector. It caused social unrest. It caused diversion of resources. And what explains this stagnating productivity is that that you didn't belong to these units, and the whole country slides down. Here's Mexico. Only 3 to 4 out of 10 people had ever been. And Mexico, suddenly the wages were up. Mexico became a high income country. Okay. And then in the mid 90s, it stagnated, and it hasn't grown in the last 30 years. It's stayed at middle income. And so today, when I'm giving this talk, people say, why are you even talking about middle income traps, Scott? China hasn't made it. Well, when I wrote this book in 2018, 2019, China was still growing at 6 or 7% a year. The years before this, they're growing at 10% a year. And this year it's more iffy, right? And after COVID and everything, but China hasn't. We thought Mexico had made it. When I was in grad school in the 1980s, everybody said Mexico was the next Taiwan. It actually squeaked up the high income, and they were part of OECD. They became part of the rich man's club. Since then, they've fallen into middle income, and they've stayed there. And Mexico went from one of the safest countries in the world to one of the most violent countries of the world. And so, that things can change. And I think it was their invisible China, that it was basically the human capital. So, okay, so I'm done talking about other countries. I'm going to talk about China right now. Where's China in this world? It's a middle income. And, you can see it was poor. It was very poor in 1960, barely in middle income. But look how far it's moved up there. I mean, it's moved up a lot. It's really grown in the last, 30 years, okay? And it of course, what China wants to do is move up here into high income, right? So while all people in the labor force, not just kids, but to keep people in the labor force, everyone should be going to high school, because I've talked about this. There's where you get the skills, the math, the science, the computers, the language. I'll say that over and over again. And that's where if you don't have those skills as you move to high income, you aren't going to be able to get a very good job. You remember, there's 840 million rural people. You need 100 million to do landscaping and be nannies and, wipe windows, but you don't need 600 million, okay? And so where is China compared to all the other countries in the upper middle income world? China is number one low. It has the least educated labor force in the whole middle income world, or upper middle income world. And those aren't my data, by the way. This is, this little census called, where there's 1.4 billion people report on, their age and what's their education level. And the highest education, it's a 50-year-old, no education, 30% only had primary. Look at everyone went to middle school, but only 30% had ever gone to one day of high school, okay? And if you haven't gone to high school, you haven't got the level of math, computers, science, and language that you need to be in the white collar labor force. So 70% of 900 million, there's 600 or 650 million people in China that can't have a white collar job. They can't participate in this high income economy. And so how does it compare to the rest of the world? Look at that. They're lower than South Africa, lower than Mexico, right? This is Mexico that's stagnated in part because of their low level human capital. China is lower than them, okay? And so far below the graduates, okay? So when you think about what does this mean, I like to take and twist it around in the United States. What happens if you didn't have a high school degree in the United States? You'd be called a high school dropout, right? And if you're a high school dropout in the United States, it is not nice. There's 5 times as many higher probability to be in jail, on drugs, on disability, on unemployment, on welfare, than to have a middle income job. It's not good to be a high school dropout in the United States. This is also true, by the way, in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, is that that you in a high income economy, you want to have the skills to be in the high income economy. Otherwise, you get shoved down into this lower part of the informal economy that's there. Who is this? Well, the people in this, remember, there's 30% of kids that have been to high school and 70 haven't. Most of that 70% that haven't gone are from rural China. They're the, you know, the sons and daughters of the workers and the informal economy. They're the ones that are left in the village or that cram themselves in the basements of the migrant communities. And you can see this. These guys just don't read well. Okay, they don't have the reading skills to learn how to learn. We went to rural China, about 40,000 kids. We went and gave them a Pearls test, a reading literacy test, and you can see that this test was given to 53 other countries, and China is number one low. Rural China is number one low. And you say, well, maybe it's because those Chinese characters are so hard to read. These kids are 15 years old, by the way. But you can see Hong Kong, Singapore, and Chinese Taipei, Taiwan, they're all towards the top. They Chinese characters too. So it's not that. It's rural Chinese have a real problem with education, okay? And you can see that as early in 2016, we went out and looked at about 40,000 urban and rural fourth grade students. And we gave them a standardized test, math test. And guess what? The urban students were testing at the 5th grade level. The rural students were testing at the 3rd grade level. So this is a competitive, very competitive education system. And the urban students are already 2 years ahead of the rural students by 4th grade. These rural students aren't going to catch up. They never do catch up. As you see, they don't learn to read. They don't do teachers. So I often get to there and people say, well, why does China ignore those guys? Okay. Well, the fact is China, I think, realizes this isn't something Scott knows and the Chinese government doesn't know. Over the past 10, 15, 20 years, they've tried to get better teachers and newer facilities and nutritious school lunches, eyeglass programs, more and more and more to try to narrow that gap, okay? And even after doing all that, the gap narrowed, but just a little bit, okay? There's still huge differences between rural, even after doing all this, okay? And you can see, like I said, and that's the reason that China has such a low percentage of its labor force that has been to high school. This is just another illustration of where China is in terms of that. And it's basically, it's rural kids just can't go to high school. They just can't learn. You can see here, China is one of the lowest educated countries in the middle income world. Okay, so, well, wait a minute. We did all this stuff. We put all this teaching. What are you going to do? You can't do anymore. Yes, you can. Because it's at this point, after we worked and worked and worked to try to, see if you can improve these rural kids. And at one point in time, we finally end up saying, maybe it's possible that many children in rural China are not able to learn, that with the emphasis on the able, okay? In other words, they get up to high school or junior high, and you can see there's this big gap, and they get all these new teachers and nutritious school lunches and everything, and they just can't do it. So is there any evidence that this is affecting China today? So you can see if they aren't able to learn, and they're dumped into this new economy, what ends up happening is that they go into the economy, and looking at 2004, China is lower middle income, or maybe middle income at this time, but at that time, almost 70% of people were in a unit, in a company. They belonged to a company. They were covered by labor laws. They had social benefits. And basically they had somebody watching out for them. But look what's happened over the last 20 years is that we've seen this fall of the number of people in units, and now it's almost reversed. It's like 60% of the labor force, that's 500 million people. 500 million people now are all working for themselves. They're informal service sector, and you can see this labor-intensive service sector is just booming. Okay, the number of people working in factories is going down. Construction is topped out. In the last 4 years, it's dropped to almost zero. And hey, the good news is if you're a professor, or if you're an investor, or if you're a teacher, or a manager, your wages, the number of your colleagues is going up. But look at how fast this unskilled informal service sector is. And guess what's happening? Wages are falling. So the wages of these guys are going up, but because so many people are being dumped into this sector, and demand is lower than supply, it's just the falling, and we're getting the beginning of polarization that's happening. So what's driving these trends? It's easy. Because China had grown so fast for so many years, wages started to go up. Guess what? Companies responded by automating and robotizing. There's more robots in China than anywhere in the world. Okay, they're globalizing. So let me stand up here. I'm gonna show you my beautiful jeans. You see my jeans here, right here? They're so beautiful. Guess what? 5 years ago, they were made in China. Today, they're made in Bangladesh. I mean, they're made in Ethiopia, and all the other labor-intensive things, just been hundreds and thousands, tens of thousands of Chinese firms that have moved to Bangladesh, where wages are $1 an hour, not $5 an hour, right? And so that we've seen globalization, happen there. And of course, there's been the global recession and COVID-19. That hasn't helped at all either. The question is should we expect more, right? And look at this. Look at this number of robots and automation. More robots have been added to Chinese labor force than Germany, South Korea, Japan, North America, all combined. Okay. And China has a policy called Made in China 2025. They aren't letting their firms move out anymore. These firms here are mostly, Samsung and Levi's. The Chinese firms that have moved to Bangladesh, they aren't allowed to leave anymore because they're supposed to produce in China. And so guess what? The government has given them subsidies to automate. Okay. And of course, that means the number of workers that have gone down. Global supply chains are continuing to shift, as if you know anything, that there's this huge effort for US and European firms and Japanese firms to shift their supply chains. So should we expect more of this falling of manufacturing labor, falling of construction, and dumping into the service sector? And if the demand for services isn't that high, wages are going to start to fall in that sector. And maybe we're going to see more. I probably will see more polarization. There's some offsetting forces, right? If unskilled laborers fall and wages fall, maybe it should slow automation. I hope so. Okay. Maybe globalization, maybe other things are causing globalization to happen too. So the question is, though, does anybody in China know about this? Okay. Is this just a secret that Scott knows? And the answer is no. Okay. China itself is pushing they're trying to raise demand for consumption inside China. So far, it hasn't been successful. There's so much uncertainty in China. People don't dare spend money in consumption. So you get all these service sector. Nobody's demanding services. They're trying to urbanize their small cities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So is this a secret? That, like I said, no. And you see the current investment behavior. Remember 2005, only 50%. So this isn't the whole labor force. This is just 15 to 17-year-olds. only half of 15 to 17-year-olds were going to China. Remember, only 30% of the whole labor force has been to high school. In 2005, only 50% had ever been to high school. But look at how much it's changed over the last 20 years. The government says, we need to send kids to high school. And they've actually made 10,000 new slots in high school over the past about 15 years. And there's been huge improvement of getting kids to high school. They wanted to universalize high school, and then COVID hit, and so they pushed it back. But the real problem here, you can see in urban China, everybody's been to high school. Now, you know, it's like Germany, 92% of kids have been to high school. Urban China is better than Germany, but the problem is in rural China. And of course, remember, 2/3 to 70% of kids in China are rural. So there's that if they're going to try to get everybody to high school, here's where the sessions, the challenge is. So it needs to focus on rural youth. And it's the problem today. Here's Central and Western China, only half of them are going to high school. You know, like I said, why not? Maybe those kids just can't learn. Look at South Korea and Taiwan, the graduates. Look at Mexico. Look at large cities in Mexico, 80 to 90% of kids went to high school. But in urban China, rural Mexico or poor, the slums, only half of them, or 40%, went to. But there's China today. Who does it look like? Mexico in the 1980s? Or looks like South Korea and Taiwan? Obviously, it looks just like Mexico. And remember, they haven't grown since that time. And when they didn't grow, what happened? They stagnated. People couldn't find jobs. A lot of people went to the United States. A lot of people went into informal economy, flipping tortillas and washing windows. And a lot of people there went into organized crime. And Mexico became one of the most violent places in the world. So what we need to do is to get students from poor rural areas into high school and provide the job training for laid off workers. And we need to make sure when they get into high school that they can learn how to learn, okay? That's what we need to do. They're going to have enough development that they're going to do that. And two, we're going to make sure that students and workers are ready to learn when they're in high school and adult training programs. There's been a real interest in China in adult training programs. So these people have lost their jobs in the factory and on the construction sites. How do you move them into a white collar? Well, let's go train them. Well, basically what they said is, come and get trained, and we'll train you. You go into a 2 or 3 week course, and we'll give you that's not what it needs. What they need is a really in-depth adult training program that teaches them math and science and computers, maybe not some math, but math and computers and language, so they can take these high income jobs, right? That's going to take a couple years. And guess what? If you're 30 years old and unemployed, but have a family, you can't take 2 years off and go back to school. You better be paid by the national government to go back to school. It's sort of like us in the United States. You're 29 years old. You dropped out of high school, but you say, hey, or you graduated from high school and didn't go to college. You say, hey, I want to go learn a skill. We have a community college program, and many of the states pay people to go back to these, and they're free, right? That's what's needed, right? In China, they aren't there now, okay? So quite simply, I'm almost through here. According to our research, there's a large share of rural people that don't have the skills to learn how to learn. They will not be able to take advantage of new opportunities. So what do we need right now? Not 10 years from now. But China needs to put a huge investment in the human capital, from K to 12, from 0 to 3. They need to preschool and before preschool, and their entire rural health system has to be revised. There also needs to be a safety net in a adult training program for those who's it's kind of too late. And if some people get in these adult training programs and can't learn, well, we better give them a good enough safety net that they say, should I keep taking my safety net payments or should I go into crime? That's what we want to try to keep them from doing. And of course, if I had another hour, I would talk to you about what really needs to happen is we need to start working with 0 to 3 babies. For 5,000 years, Chinese wanted to make these babies farmers. Okay, they wanted and they had 3 goals of 3 objectives in raising their baby. I don't want my baby to die. I don't want my baby to get sick and keep them safe. And I don't want them, I want to make them strong. Okay. So I want to keep them healthy. I don't want to let them die. And I want to get them strong. That's not enough for today. You have to stimulate your babies. You got to make them ready for college, right? When they're 0 to 3. And so that's where we need to go. I can answer some questions about that later, but that's most of our work today is on these 0 to 3 babies. So I thank you for listening. And I know I went through a lot of material real quick. There's questions, I'd be happy to ask them, and we can get Brandon and I can sort of talk a little about, how to do it. So thank you very much.
That's good, Scott. Thank you it was a wide-ranging talk, really thorough on summarizing a lot of your research on the importance of high school and just secondary and elementary education as a foundation for economic growth, economic development. These important larger important topics and how those relate, and also some of the potential problems on the horizon, given this big urban-rural gap in educational opportunity and attainment as well. For those in attendance here, we can take questions. I'll probably start with a question or two as well if you have any. There are 2 options. If you look at your controls on WebEx, there's the chat function. There's a button that looks like a sort of word cloud. You can click on that and then you can type in a question, and I can help moderate that. If you do have audio capability and want to use audio, that's your choice. You can also there's a hand function there. It looks like a hand raise. You can raise that, and I or Scott can call on you. Let me start because you had mentioned that you've done fieldwork for so long. So much of China so well through the decades that you've worked there. It sounds like your current research is focusing on as you said, 0 to 3 or K to 3. The youngest folks in school. I mean, you present this as, okay, there's a lack of educational. There's a lack of folks either getting into high school or getting to high school and not succeeding necessarily, or graduating. Is there a way to maybe start to talk about, or do you have any understanding, or your team have any understanding yet of sort of more core reasons why that is? Do you think it's something to do perhaps with elementary education? Is it kind of a failure to launch thing where maybe they're not getting necessary skills really early on in life? Is it are the middle schools or high school are the middle schools or elementary schools not preparing them adequately for high school? Is it something in the villages and a cultural thing? I know there's a lot of different factors that could affect that, but if you could talk maybe, and maybe it does relate to some of your more recent research on elementary ed. Any ideas yet on what is causing this lack of high school completion or achievement?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, so I started working on this, about, gosh, it's more than 15 years ago, and we started trying to say, why are so few of these rural high school students getting into college? So we tried to help them out, and everything we did didn't matter. Basically, the few kids, the rural kids that could get into high school, they were already working so hard and they were the ones that had made it. And so, and of course, the other thing we said, well, it's expensive. It actually is expensive to go to high school. High school is not compulsory, and we gave all these scholarships to these high school kids, thinking that it's because their families were so poor. Well, we found out, and we do big experiments. So we went out and found 300 rural freshmen in high school, and we went to 150 of them and said, we're going to pay for all your high school. And then these 150, they didn't even know that we told those other 150 that we were going to pay for high school. We just didn't pay for them. And guess what? They all graduated at the same rate, and they all went on to college at the same rate. Because even these really poor families, if your kid got into high school, oh my God, you would do you sell, you sell everything, you borrow money, and you send your kid to, because it changes your whole life. It changes your family's whole life. So we didn't have. Then we did a junior high, and we have this big paper because we kept failing at our experiments. So we'd incentivize teachers to teach harder. We'd give free school lunches to these kids, and it didn't have effect. And because what we found is already in junior high is half the kids had already decided they had absolutely no way they were ever going to get into college or get into high school or college. And they basically either actually dropped out, or they just were going through the motions, waiting to get through the end of their 8th grade year, finish junior high, and then go to work. The other kids that were in the upper half said, I can go to high school and I can go to college. And they were just like those high school students. They were working so hard already that everything we did, it didn't matter. Then we got down to elementary school, and we started to have an impact. But that's where you saw the impact is even we incentivized their teachers, and we gave them scholarships, and we gave them glasses and intestinal worm medicine, and that it helped a little bit, right? That all their grades rose when we did that versus the control group that didn't get any, but it didn't get anywhere near the level that they would need to go on in life. And so, that's when I took a colleague of mine who he started the School of Public Health at Emory University in Atlanta. We'd started together at Stanford, and he went there and started, and we took him to China. It was about 2014, 15. And he ends up telling me, Scott, I think these kids just aren't, he was looking at all of our data, and we talked, I think they just can't learn. And he says, the whole world has discovered this new field called babynomics, the economics of babies. And it's the hottest field now in development economics, in that, that if you don't get them right 0 to 3, that's when your brain's plasticity is at its greatest. Yeah, you can raise development levels. I hate to say it, IQ and language, and you can raise those at 4 to 5 years old, but basically at 3, it's mostly done. And he says, I think these kids aren't being raised. And so we started going asking parents and saying, do you read to your kid? And the parents go, I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood your question. I thought you asked me, do I read to my kid? Of course I do not read to my kid. My kid is 1 year old, right? And do you tell stories? No. Do you sing to your kid? Why? They're 2 years old, right? And that's when we launched into these new programs that are being done around the world now, of where you train the parents to stimulate their kids. And guess what? These kids, boom, went right up to normal. And we're now following these kids. We did our first intervention when they were 2014, when they were 2. They're now 10, and they're doing so much better than the control group in math and science, and so and this is happening around the world. I often say it's the biggest problem China has, that no one knows about. fortunately, the word is finally getting up to the Ministry of Health, and they're starting a big 0 to 3 program. It's its infancy, but so it's a long answer to your question, but I mean, I think that summarizes kind of where we're at in our program.
It's a really fascinating answer, and I mean, it goes right to the question. I mean, it speaks so much to what we've learned in psychology too about human development, and so again, interventions, as you say, to be able to get parents get these skills into the kids as early as possible really seems to have, as you're finding, a sizable effect, maybe some of the biggest effects that you found. So that's really key. I wonder too if it's and this has certainly become a big thing, in the past few decades in the United States, if it's for those that didn't get that sort of launching as when they were infants or young adolescents, remedial education. I wonder if that's like um, different levels in middle school and high school. I don't know if that's something you know about, or if it speaks to briefly about Chinese schools, how they're organized, and maybe for those, because you talked about you know, some of the some of the younger folks not having the attitude essentially that if they weren't achieving early, they just kind of gave up or didn't think they could achieve anything or get out of the village or what have you, or get through high school or get into high school. Is it maybe something where more remedial type of efforts or interventions would maybe better speak to that, or maybe that's already been tried?
No, I think it's a great question. I so in even in healthy populations, the Bay Area, Canada, um, the Germany, France is. I don't know why. I mean, this is God or Darwin or Buddha, right? Whatever would, even in healthy populations, about 15% of the kids will go through 0 to 3 to 5 to kindergarten, and they'll be developmentally delayed. Okay. I mean, so, and now, it's much higher in China, right? And so what we do in California is there's remedial education that starts and that we try to keep these kids from falling behind. The whole idea of that is that you want to make sure that they learn enough math and science and computers that they're able to function in this economy we have. It's easy to say the current efforts of remedial teaching in China is 0. Okay. It's a competitive system where basically, everybody is trying to learn at the highest level because they all compete at the same exam to go to you have to take an exam to go to high school, and then you have to take an exam to go to college. And so there's I think that it is needed drastically. And so that's a thing we've talked a little about. But we're trying to get as many 0 to 3 kids straight first. But I think it's a lot of them are going to slip through the crack, even if everyone gets parental training and all the kids get stimulated. You're still going to have 15% of your population is still 100 million people. You want them to be able to participate in this high income economy. So it's a great question, great sort of question, but observation.
No, and you're right. Of course, universal high school, getting everybody through high school. You've made such a convincing case. How fundamental it is to human development just in general. So
Yeah.
it certainly is a really key factor here, not one that a lot of us are necessarily familiar with the data on, as you went through very well. We had a lot of questions here actually, and so I can pick out a few maybe. One of the first ones, let me go back up here. I'm just scrolling just a second. I think it's from Zoe. Do you think that given, so she's asking about what, and I think this was also from Bianca too, a few. I sort of asked about how this is going to affect, or how we see it affecting economic developments of China over time. You seem to be making this argument that this, could continue to affect the decrease in economic growth, or maybe stagnation of China generally. This sort of misfitting between the educational level of the population and the skills needed to continue to grow at high levels. Um, Maybe I could combine that a little bit with, you know, sort of the economic outlook, but also, you mentioned the term polarization between the urban and rural sectors of society. Um, do we have any understanding of how, or your team have any understanding of how, is there a lot of rural resentment of the urban population? Do folks in the villages or in the rural areas, you know, are they expressing polarization or polarized attitudes? Is this something that maybe could potentially happen more in the future? So maybe I suppose there are a couple questions there, but maybe you could speak to that a little bit, because it is these dynamics of urban rural are so becoming so widespread in many countries of the world, and they are important trends. What, how do these Chinese rural folks think about these things, and how does this maybe affect the economic growth? So I know those are kind of two questions, so maybe we can take them in turn.
Okay, so yeah, I think the first question is, I like this question. It's do they, despise all this inequality that's going on? And it's exactly the question that one of my colleagues, it's from that university it starts with an H back in Boston. This was a sociologist named Marty White. He's now professor emeritus, but Marty did fantastic work on inequality in China. And for 20 years, he ran these surveys, and he would ask a whole spectrum from the rich to the poor. He'd say, do you know that there's high inequality in China? Right? And then, people would say, he's asking his question to this worker who's, polishing the windshield of a Mercedes Benz, right? And he's saying, and the guy goes, duh, look who that's not my car here, and of course there's, okay. But then they would say, what do you think about that? They ask the exact same question you just said. Do you hate these urban? And they would say, this is 100% of the people would say, no, I don't mind inequality, because one, I'm better off today than my parents were when I'm this age. I'm better off today than I was 10 years ago. And until 2015, almost everyone in 2015, a vast majority even said, I think I'll be better off 10 years from now than I am today. So huge inequality, but everyone's getting better. Okay. And okay. Marty's retired. He sent me all of his questionnaire, and we have now replicated that in 2023. Okay. There's a few little caveats, but it's basically right. And we haven't even finished the survey yet, but we pulled out the data and looked at it. Basically, what the data show is remarkable. Okay, remember, 100% said, I'm going to be better off 10 years from now than I am today. Today, only 13% said that. 13 from 100% to 13%. Okay. 22% said, I'm afraid I'm going to be worse off 10 years from now than I am today. And I'm worried about that. All the rest, 75%, about 70%, they all said, you know what? I don't know. I'm worried about that. I don't know what the future holds for me. This is exactly, what I think you need to worry about polarization, because, when these rural workers start to say, I'm going to get worse and worse off over time, what do? Right? Well, they have three choices. One, they can go back and farm. But guess what? we did a survey in a factory once of 20,000 rural workers, and we asked them, "What are you going to do 10 years from now?" And only 1% said, "I'm going to go back and farm." 99% of them said, "I'll never farm. I don't know how to farm. I've never farmed, and I make more money in 3 weeks than my dad makes in a year. I'm never going to farm." Okay, so they can farm. They can change their mind and farm. Two, they can go into the informal service sector economy, and you see what's happening to those wages. They're going down, and the people see it going down. That's why they don't know what the future is going to be. Number three, heaven forbid, they drop out of the formal sector. They drop out of the informal sector, and they go into the crime sector. And we don't want this to happen, but those are the three options that those guys have. So I think that we're at a turning point, and I think those questions were asked exactly right.
It's powerful. It's really powerful evidence that this is something that could be simmering a little bit under the surface, or that could,
And it hasn't got there yet. Exactly, it hasn't got there. I mean, people. That's what they're saying. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do? To make that jump from going to the illicit of the formal economy to the illicit economy, right? That's a huge step, because I mean, am I going to be arrested? Am I going to be killed? And they make that only as a last resort, and they're not there yet, but I worry that it's headed there.
And you get a generational change. Really old people from a decade or two ago, I imagine, or middle-aged people, they would have remembered the time under Mao, probably, much harder times perhaps, and and you get you get a younger rural generation that maybe has different life experiences.
They
And
thought it was going to be.
relative, right?
They
So you
thought it was
don't,
going to be that,
right,
and it's going like that. Right.
right. And then you get, I imagine, I think you mentioned a stat on this, that government officials, obviously there's a large government bureaucracy in China. I mean, there's less rural connections of people that work in the government now. Is that correct? Or there's, I mean, they're more urbanized now, I suppose, than maybe ever before. So maybe there's that can sort of play into the sort of elite versus rural. We see this trend in a lot of countries where the rural folks think, certain percentage think they don't have or do experience, and legitimately a lack of opportunity. They look at this concept of elites, that are out of touch and culturally different than us, and perhaps that's also something that affects it here in there in China too.
I think. I mean, and again, I mean, when the Chinese government finally figures out this problem, they tend to move. They don't always do it right, but they try to do it right, and they see it do it wrong, and they adjust. So I have some confidence if this is understood. The other thing to understand is, remember, why is Brazil, attacking 0 to 3 problems and doing lots for this informal sector? It's because they've gone up and down and up and down and up and down for 70 years. China is just making its first move towards here. And, I think most of the people in the urban economy, the leaders, they think they've made it, right? Then they think there's only one way up, right? And, but I think now they start to see, maybe this isn't, as easy as that. And it ain't easy, right? I mean, as we saw, it's only been done by a handful of countries in the past 70 years. So.
Right. Do you have this has been fascinating, Scott. Do you have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions? Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's fine. We can. I'll try to keep them shorter.
Okay, no, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure,
No, I'm
sure
more
you
than
don't
happy
want to
to.
overkeep you from anything. So, so you mentioned that the Chinese government has recognized, it seems, that this is an issue, and has tried to invest in some ways in it. Could you maybe talk a little bit about sort of how much does the Chinese national government, federal government, the Communist Party, do they have a lot of control over education, K-12 education? Is that more of a local policy issue in China? Are local governments involved? I mean, how much power does the China at the federal level have over this issue?
Well, it's actually another good question. Formally, China and the United States are very much alike in this matter. Yeah, the size of our two countries' land area are almost exactly the same. China is a tiny bit bigger. Think of it as exactly the same. China has about 2,500 counties. We have about 2,500 counties here. I mean, if you think of how big a county, you were talking about your county, right? Think of how big that county is. Now, there's 5 times as many people in each county in China than there are in the United States, but it's that same thing. Plus, and it's probably because given the huge size and the diverse population, is China is actually as decentralized as the U.S. in terms of its education policy. We have 40,000 school districts in the United States, 40, and that they fund and run schools locally, right? And in most states, it's funded by property taxes, right? And so, guess what? If I showed you all the houses out there in Palo Alto, where the average home is about $5 million, and guess what? They pay about $60,000 in taxes every year. Palo Alto schools are pretty well funded. Okay, yeah, but if you go out beyond where I just showed you, out to Modesto and Stockton and Fresno, now the average house size is about $300,000, and they don't get very much taxes out of those guys. They aren't very well, and that's exactly what China is like too. Is they're funded by local taxes, and so you got this huge discrepancy. Now, just like in the U.S., where we discovered that our poor rural schools, our poor urban slum schools, need upper level help. China upper level government has helped. They do transfer resources down, and when they identify a problem, the central government in China has more ability to intervene than than the federal government. I mean, the federal government does intervene in education, right? So I think that that's a big part of the problem. I often say that, and people will laugh at me for being too naive. I think the federal government at China, the national government, central government, should take total control over all 120,000 schools in rural China. And everybody says, well, how do you do that? There's such an information problem. And of course there is, right? And so, yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem of a big country. I think that's something that really needs to be dealt with. So that was a complicated question. I was supposed to answer it shorter, but I think that is one of the fundamental things. And I think that the central government needs to do more.
Well, I think this leads then perfect maybe into a final question, because it goes along with a question that a student asked here near the end, and from Antonio. And so I can, because what you just said, I think melds into this. So I mean, so if you could sort of summarize, a handful of what, if you, I imagine you have advised the Chinese government in some ways about how to improve education, given your lengthy research and all the different trials and experiments and research you've done. What would be some of the main things that you would recommend at this point? I mean, this is maybe kind of a summary of some of the items you've already said, but if you could have the ear of and have it implemented, what do you think are some major ways to improve the educational outcomes here of this massive and, as you said, big and spread out rural population that is quite diverse?
Well, the first thing I would do is I would stop building high-speed rails. Okay, China has the most high-speed rail, and you know what? They're fantastic. It's so convenient, but Upper Pine County in northern Nebraska doesn't need a high-speed rail for those 5,000 people, and it costs hundreds of millions of dollars to take it from Des Moines up there, right? Have them take a bus to Des Moines and then get on the high-speed rail there. It's already there, right? So um, I love the space program. I really like space exploration. My dad used to get us up, when Apollo was going to the moon, and he'd drag us up at like 4 a.m. so we'd see the rocket launches in the East Coast. I grew up in LA, right? I love that. And I like that China has a space program. Instead of trying to get to the moon in 2030, that's their goal, make it 2040. China, when you get to the moon, guess what? You're going to find dirt, right? There's only dirt up there, right? There's nothing valuable up there. I want you to go, but go and don't do Belt and Road anymore, right? I mean, giving debt to all these other countries that these countries aren't going to pay back. Okay, my whole point is take all those funds and focus them on human capital in China. And that's what needs it is, and slow down your growth, right? If China just keeps a slow growth pattern, and they invest in 0 to 3, 3 to 5, K to 12, that keep a stable economy, keep it from falling, and do adult training, right? Give a safety net for those who can't learn. It's a big job, right? And China, remember, China's per capita income is 70th in the world. There's 69 countries that are richer than China on a per capita income basis. So it's going to take a huge effort to do that, and it's going to slow down your growth in other areas. But I think that's what you want to do. And then by 2030 or 2040, then we can start to accelerate that growth again, and everybody can prosper together. So I think it's a great question, Antonio. And actually, the questions have been really good. So it's it's a good question from you too, Brandon.
It's a very good summary. I mean, there's a lot of this impressive infrastructure, right? And that's a lot of what China has been, and a lot of funds and time put into global influence as well. And we can understand that, of course. But there's a simmering human capital problem, as you laid a lot of convincing evidence out about, and maybe allocating more to that, those internal things instead of some of the external stuff would really help, because there are some problems simmering under the surface areas, and sometimes not even under the surface, as you've indicated so well. Scott, thank you so much for this. This has been one dynamic conversation with so much good summary of so many fascinating studies, and really gets our students thinking about the importance of education and development in security. And it's again sometimes a topic that is a bit overlooked, and it shouldn't be, because it really does provide those foundational skills, as you've shown so well, for how countries grow and how populations thrive. And thank you for sharing your decades-long research in China, and your depth of knowledge. It's definitely been a pleasure to listen and to have these questions answered.
Well, thanks for reaching out. It's my pleasure. Great questions. We got to do this in person someday, okay? And
well, we will try to bring you to our county on the other side of the country. So exactly. Not a Chinese county, but we're Philadelphia suburbs, so we're populous in our own way. So
good. Good. Okay.
Yeah. But thank you, Scott, so much for all this information, and thanks to all of you for joining us on the Global Studies Lecture Series. We'll see you all next time. So thanks, everybody.